It's
But yeah,
it's on.
great. So, and Bev, so you're a WellSprings member, but professionally you are a therapist or a counselor. Do you use the words interchangeably or?
Yeah, pretty much.
Yeah.
I think I usually call myself a therapist
Mhm.
because I do therapy and I suppose I do counseling as well. So there's not really any difference
Yeah.
technically when you're in this kind of circle of work. So it's
Yeah.
sort of just a matter of preference.
Okay. Well, can you tell us a little bit about what you do professionally and how long you've been doing it?
So I got my master's degree in 2006. So I've been in the field for 14 years now. I have been in not every single form of counseling that you can be in, but a lot of them. I've done inpatient, I've done outpatient. I've always done, it seems like, some form of IOP, which is intensive outpatient programming. It's for individuals that are more acute than just needing one-on-one individual therapy, but not so acute that they would need something more intense like a partial program or the hospital. So it's kind of like an in-between. So individuals who are getting worse and to kind of head them off before they go to the hospital and hopefully give them the skills so that they don't end up there, or individuals who are stepping down from the hospital and trying to reintegrate into life.
Yeah.
So
I,
my
I
primary company that I work for, that's well, actually, it was all they do. Actually, they're opening up outpatient at the end of this year as well.
mhm.
So the other company that I work for part time, just doing individual therapy, I'm going to be switching over and going back to my normal company, regular company. I don't know what you want to call it at the other place that I work for.
Yeah.
So it'll all be in house, which will make my taxes a lot easier, which I'm personally very grateful for because I hate taxes.
Yes. Well, and this is also something I actually learned a lot about just in the last couple of years as Reverend Ken at Wellsprings transitioned into becoming a counselor as well. I
Mm-hmm.
didn't really understand kind of the levels of care and the model of that. Like I'd heard bits and pieces, but it makes sense that there's kind of inpatient hospitalization where someone is residential within a facility receiving mental health treatment 24/7. There's
Mm-hmm.
partial hospitalization, which actually I'm not super clear on what that means, but it seems relatively self-evident, probably part of that.
It's sort of, I call it like going to school or going to work because you're there all day. So it's
Got it.
usually like a 9 to 3 type of a program Monday through Friday,
Okay.
which is obviously a lot more time than the 2 hours a day that I do with the IOP.
But not residential. So, yeah.
Right.
So hospitalization, inpatient, partial hospitalization. And then I'd never even heard, I think, of IOP until Reverend Ken started working for an IOP program, which is
He
intensive
actually works at the
outpatient.
same
Yeah.
company as I do.
Yeah. So intensive outpatient meaning like it's like a group that you go to a few times a week, right?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yep.
Yeah. And then basically below that is outpatient, which is I think
Mm-hmm.
what certainly what I thought of as going to therapy. You know,
Right.
outpatient is I have an appointment with my therapist maybe once a week, maybe once every other week, maybe even once a month, and
Yep.
that's what that is.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And
Okay.
there can be group therapy in regular old outpatient as well. And usually that would be like you said, the same thing, either once a week or once a month.
Okay. And you've worked at pretty much all of those different levels, it sounds like.
I've worked at every single one of those different levels, yeah.
Yeah. Cool. And now mostly do outpatient and IOP.
Yep.
Cool. What types of issues do you tend to see people for? What do you have a focus that you kind of zero in on in your work?
I have actually made somewhat great efforts to not become a specialist, which is interesting because in general the way that you make money in this business is by becoming like a super niche specialist. Like I'm the only person who does this, and subsequently if you want to deal with this issue you have to come to me. And I'm way too eclectic for that.
Mm,
I like people way too much for that.
mm,
I like being able to deal with different issues. So I've done, I would say, the only things that I'm not comfortable dealing with. I'm definitely not great with autism spectrum. I have worked with a lot of autistic spectrum disordered people. I know and love a lot of autistic spectrum disordered people in my personal life.
mm.
But so far as the intricacies of kind of, defer to them.
Mhm.
Um, but outside of that, grief, trauma, eating disorders. Most of my clients are dealing with some level of depression and anxiety. Those are sort of the two main things that all humans struggle with on some level, I think. And so, yeah, individually, you know, just about anything, you know, I will tell people, hey, I'll let you know as soon as I'm uncomfortable, but let's give it a shot. And because of that, I've had the opportunity to just get a lot of exposure to a lot of different, I don't even like the word disorders, but difficulties, let's call them. Because I think that the human brain is significantly more similar than it is dissimilar, and subsequently the ways in which we struggle are significantly more similar than dissimilar. And I think that's kind of like the main thing that I do as a counselor is I just sort of like, you're not crazy, right? Like there's a reason that you feel this way. It's okay. Like we have such an ability to kind of demonize our own minds, and that kind of gets in the way of healing, understanding, connection, and everything else that we need to be able to do as humans. So to just be able to say like, no, like there's a very good reason why this thing that seems absolutely crazy is happening to you. So, and this year has been that times a million, because I don't know a single human on the planet who isn't struggling on some level with all this.
Yeah. How have you seen the pandemic affect the kinds of mental health challenges that people are dealing with this year? Has it changed, like from your perspective as someone working in the field, how is it different? Is it just a question of volume and quantity, or is it actually changing kind of the sorts of problems that people are having?
In a very general way, I would say no. In a much more specific way, certainly yes. Like most parents are not used to homeschooling, and that's what they've had to do on some level, even if their kids are enrolled in school. Most people are not used to working from home and all of the details that come with like, well, where is this person going to be in the house, and where's that person going to be in the house, and how are we going to make sure that we can't hear each other, and how we're going to stop the dog from barking in the middle of the meeting, which is not going to happen. So just sort of the details that come with that, and then the emotions that come with that is just like a lot of uncertainty. I don't know what I'm doing. I don't know if I'm doing it right. I feel like I'm probably not doing it right and I'm doing it wrong. And I think because of that, just all of the normal problems that we human beings can have just been amped up. Like they're more intense, they're more constant. We don't really get a break from them like we normally do. And that certainly goes with relationships too, because, you know, we're all in each other's hair 24/7 in ways that we're not used to. You know, like work for a lot of people is a big part of their identity. So, you know, there's a sense of like who I am that comes from like putting on my work suit and heading to the office and buying my cup of coffee along the way. Like there's a whole persona that kind of gets lost when I'm sitting in my pajamas in front of my laptop with, you know, my husband in the next room, my kids downstairs.
Yeah. It's super disorienting.
Exactly. Yeah.
And even if it's not even if it's not actively more stressful, which I think it is for a lot of people, it's still very disorienting. Yeah.
And I think because we don't know when it's going to end. We don't know what the end is going to look like. We think we know at this point in time that there's going to be some new version of normal, but it's going to be different. And we don't know what that consists of. So
that's super easy to prepare for then. Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So like, yeah, just with that level of uncertainty, I think a lot of people in the beginning, and certainly myself included, like when this all started, I was like, I got this, right? Like, it's fine. I'll work from home for a little bit. Like things will be a little bit different, but I'll enjoy not having to drive the hour to work or whatever. And it'll be cool. And as, you know, the months have turned into, at this point in time, like closer to a year, I think that has worn off for everyone, and everyone has a sense of weariness of like, when is this going to end? Is it going to end? What is it going to look like when it does end? Like, and there's no answers to any of those questions. So I think a lot of it is, I mean, in some ways, I think it's a really fantastic kind of spiritual challenge, because it's, what do you do to keep yourself sane with the reality that the majority of your life is not within your control? And normally we get to ignore that fact and pretend that that isn't the case.
Yeah.
And we have been, that fact has been in our faces all the time this year. So, kind of like, what am I going to do to focus on the very, very tiny portion of my existence that I can actually control? How am I going to focus on the things that really matter in the midst of so much stuff that doesn't?
Mm-hmm.
Um, and while, that's how challenges are, nobody ever wants them, but when they come, they can actually prove really beneficial to kind of paring down all of the different things that we tend to get so uptight about and really focusing on what's real.
Yeah. Crisis times can be really clarifying, and they often, when they hit people, like you said, in small doses, when we can spend most of our lives, as many of us do, feeling like we know what's coming, we know what we're planning for, we know what tomorrow's going to look like, mostly, right? We enter a crisis period where that changes, and it's acute. It's like a temporary thing, and we might deal with the stresses and also see the possibilities, and at some point we find our way into whatever a new normal looks like. And even with big losses and grief, while that can be totally earth shattering and world changing, actually the world usually stays pretty much the same. Our world may
Right.
change, but not quite so with this. Some things
No.
are, one of the things that's always been weird about this time to me is that some things are eerily exactly the same and other things are eerily completely different, and that's really hard
Yeah.
to process. Like, traffic still works the way it used to. Like, when I get in a car, everything still happens the way I would expect. Like, but I'm not going anywhere that I would normally go, and I can't because it's not open. And if I did go there, it would be sort of like I was talking today about how normally on a Tuesday I would drive to Melbourne Buttery and I would sit there. And I'm like, I could do that right now, but I wouldn't sit there. When I got there, I would have had to place an order yesterday, and I would be wearing a mask, and I would be picking it up at a window, and then I would be getting
Yeah.
back in my car. Like, so there's this strange semi-normalness to it, but also total abnormalness to it that's also disorienting.
Yeah.
Yeah. I was going to say something else about what you said, and I forget what it was. So instead, I might just move on to my next question. Carol also commented again. Carol said, yes, the not ending of all this and the being at the mercy of those who won't work for the common good. Yeah, I know I can't control that, but it's really hard. Yeah. Yeah. Oh, that's what I was going to say. Thank you, Carol. You reminded me. The way that often a crisis time like this works in our lives is that it's so temporary. But I had that feeling too at the beginning of like, oh, I can do this, and I know how to manage, this change, and I can see the potential for good within it, and especially as someone who leads a spiritual community, I definitely had that feeling of like the sense of kind of spiritual work that is involved in this. And I remember thinking at some point, like, this is what we've been training for. Like, this is, not this is great because it's not great, but like, this is, this is when the kind of work on ourselves and the spiritual practices that we've been practicing come into play. This is when we flex those muscles and use them. And I still very much believe that's true, but it has also been remarkable to see how we have been training for this. If we've been doing, I think, work on ourselves, whether that's personal work or spiritual work. And yet we didn't just get thrown into a 5K, we got thrown into some kind of ultra marathon that we don't know where the finish line is. And that adjustment hit me maybe like a month or two ago, I think, that like, oh, we have been training for this, and it still doesn't mean that I'm going to be able to run this race, full speed, 24/7, far from it, right? We kind of have to keep practicing. I think we kind of have to keep practicing those skills as we go along, and recognize that we are benefiting from whatever we've kind of trained and developed in ourselves, but we're still training and developing as this goes on. It's not just like a race that we're running now that we're going to get to a finish line. It's ongoing practice at a different level almost. So, yeah.
It's funny, that makes me think of so there's a documentary, I think the name is The Race That Eats Its Young, something like that. It's about the Barkley Marathon, which was based on there was a prison up in the mountains that someone escaped from, but because it's up in the mountains and it's like far secluded from everything else, they got lost in the woods for 3 days, and ultimately were recaptured. So the marathon, in order to replicate that, so it's 150 miles altogether that consists of 5 loops of 30 miles. Every time you complete a loop, you go back the direction that you came in, and it's like you're climbing up mountains and going through like bushes and valleys, and like you very easily get lost, and like there's no clear path, and it's literally like insanity.
Yeah.
And the people who do it, like, of maybe like 100 people will start, and on a good year 2 people will actually finish the whole thing.
Wow.
But it kind of reminds me of that, because it's like, yeah, like if I had not trained for that, that's kind of what this year has been like.
What an interesting challenge to take on recreationally.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But then some people say that about meditation, or other challenges that some people want to take on. So yeah,
it's very
or
true.
competitive hot dog eating. Different things float different people's boats. So going back from now my brain is thinking about how awful I would feel if I did that marathon, because I don't even like running. But but going back to some of what we were talking about, just the different kind of severity level maybe of the stress and the uncertainty that people are carrying around in the challenges of dealing with this year. How, I guess in your work, but also just in your life, how do you see it, all of this affecting people's relationships? And are people coming to you with new kinds of relationship challenges related to this these days?
Yes and no. So for a nuclear family that you are in the same house with each other, I think that the primary challenges are just, again, I don't get that escape, right? I don't get to go off to work and be whatever I am professionally. I don't get to go off and see my friends and be whoever I am socially. I don't get to go off and do my yoga class or my go to the gym or whatever it is. Like there were so many different ways in which we sort of presented ourselves to the world that we don't get access to, certainly not easily if you do choose to get access to those things nowadays. So we're in each other's space. So there's just a lot more that you're just seeing each other a lot more. You're given the opportunity to irritate each other a lot more. You are bearing witness to each other in your worst states a lot more. And there's just less escape from that. For individuals who aren't in the same home together, it's sort of looking at like, and this was certainly something before, but definitely this year has heightened it, is how much of our intimacy is online. Like there's been a lot of my teens have started very meaningful, intimate relationships completely online. They have no idea when they're going to be able to actually meet their significant other in person. And again, that was certainly something that happened before all this, because we have a World Wide Web. So you could start an intimate relationship with someone in Germany or Canada or wherever. You could always do that. But I think that a lot more people have kind of, because their whole world has been online, there's just been more exposure to that, more opportunities for that, and more meeting that way that has kind of led to, what does this look like? And in some ways, it's kind of interesting for me personally. It's been that aspect of image. And, every time I kind of think about it, it's like, wow, we've been friends for like almost 20 years now. That's insane. But, we've all stayed in touch over the years, and we used to get together maybe like once a year, and we would all converge at my friend's John's house, and we would have JohnCon, we called it. And we loved that, but then the rest of the year we'd sort of be out of touch.
Yeah.
And since all this started, I think it was John started a Discord chat for all of us, and we get together once a week now and just talk with each other. And we do something called, and I think I may have mentioned this before, but we do something called Movie Fight, which is he'll make a bracket of like our favorite action movies or our favorite fantasy movies of the 2000s or the 2010s or whatever. And then we'll, you know, kind of argue about which one is better until we pare it down to the ultimate winner. And that consists of a whole lot of conversations about like, oh my God, I love it when that happened. And oh, that was ridiculous. I can't believe that. And it's just us kind of being how we always were, but having the opportunity to do that on a much more frequent and regular basis than we ever had before. And, you know, I have frequently thought like, this is awesome. And I love this. Why weren't we doing this the whole time?
Mm-hmm.
Can we make sure that this doesn't go away? And of course, it started because, you know, a lot of us are isolated. We don't necessarily have access to other people. It's not great for our mental health. Shocking that, like, my closest friends all have mental health disorders. Huge surprise there. And to be able to kind of have that contact with each other, I think that we have, like, we're constantly saying to each other, like, I love you. My life is so much better because you're in it. You are the best people ever. Like, we're just very upfront about kind of owning that closeness that we all feel to each other and saying out loud how important those connections are. And it's, again, it's not like it wasn't always there, but kind of having everything thrown into the blender the way that it has been has just made it that much more important to say.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that that aspect of things for the individuals who are able to kind of connect like that has been huge.
Mm-hmm.
And I would like to think that it's been healing because, again, like that was always the case, but maybe you didn't know it. Maybe you didn't realize it. Maybe you weren't able to feel it as much just because daily life pulls us in so many different directions. So, I mean, there's a lot of bad about this year. There's a lot of bad about not being able to do things the way that we used to, but there's also a lot of good. And I hope, I pray so deeply that the good stuff that has come from this doesn't.
Uh-oh, Bev froze for me. I wonder if Bev froze for anyone else. Bev, you were saying something so good. Yeah, I'm going to re-invite Bev. Hold on one second. I got you. We'll edit this part out. Hey.
Oh, okay.
Sorry.
No, not at all.
You were right in the middle of something that you were about to say that was going to be beautiful about what you hoped and prayed with. And I was like, oh no. What you hoped and prayed we would still take, I think, from this time, right?
Yes, I'm. Let's just assume that what I said when I froze was way better than what I'm going to say right now.
Yeah.
And just fixed everything. But to the best of my knowledge, it was something along the lines of I hope that all the good stuff that has come from things not being normal doesn't go back to normal when things go back to normal.
Yeah, I hope so too. That's been my hope since the very beginning of this, that we would not miss the opportunity that this was.
Yeah.
And that we would somehow find a chance to let it help us see clearly, like I said, the ways that crisis can be clarifying, as we long for going back to normal, that we remember the parts of normal that weren't working for us,
Mm-hmm.
and allow the positive things to come out. I mean, that to me is the redemption of all of this pain that we're seeing all around us, is that, as often is true with any kind of pain that we go through, right? It can clarify for us what's most important, and it can,
Mm-hmm.
in forcing us to let go of some things, it can remind us that we can choose to not pick some things back up if they weren't working for us in the first place. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And maybe to do, I mean, I've experienced some of the same thing that you were talking about with your friends, of a little bit of that feeling you get when you have that sense you're closer to life's edge,
and you're like, screw it, I'm gonna say I love you more. I'm gonna, I'm gonna say this kind of embarrassing thing to this person I care about.
Yeah.
I'm gonna be a little more vulnerable. That has definitely been a huge silver lining for me, and it's come up in similar ways as what you were describing, with friends that I don't see very regularly, and now I'm kind of connecting with more regularly, because there's this equalizing force. So it's not like it's better if we're in person and it's not as good if we're online. It's like, well,
Right.
most everything is online, so it's all kind of leveled out now, and I can connect with my friends who live in different time zones and live in different places, and we can all get on a Zoom together and have happy hour or brunch or something, and just try new ways to stay connected. Yeah.
Yeah.
When you think about what we're going through right now, are there, and I know that when we talked about this before, you said we were really thinking about relationships, not just in terms of our interpersonal relationships, but our intrapersonal relationships, kind of our relationship to ourselves. And I heard echoes of that when you were describing one of the challenges for people who live in a home with other people. And part of this struggle is that you almost don't get to have these different roles that you're normally playing in your life. You go out into the world and you're your working self, or you're with one group of friends and you're the person you were when you met them a little more, and then when you're home, you might be the spouse or the partner or the parent. Do you have suggestions? People maybe aren't even aware that that's part of what they're struggling with, but I think talking about it is helpful. Do you have suggestions for how to cope with that? I guess that sort of flattening of all those different roles. That's a hard one, I know.
No, that is. It's a good question. In some ways it's boundaries, right? There have been 1,000,001 articles online about how to work from home that people who have worked from home for their entire careers are like, hey, it's not going to be a regular work day, so don't expect yourself to do 8 hours. And like, you do actually need to set some boundaries around like your workspace and not have a TV there, and change out of your pajamas and put on work clothes if it actually makes you feel like you're more of your work self. And structure the breaks that you're going to take to feed the dog or take care of the kids or whatever. Like, try to, as much as it's a very different way of kind of doing it, try to still have some structure around it that makes it its own thing, separate from, oh, I'm just going to do this for a little bit now. Because when you have that kind of blurring of those lines, obviously you're going to be significantly less productive at work, but also you're not going to be able to get that, like, okay, I'm relaxing now, right? Like, if I've been sitting in my pajamas all day, then what does it mean when I'm sitting on my pajamas on my couch watching TV, right? Like, well, it's just a different place, but like, it's the same kind of thing.
I can still scroll through my email and answer a couple. Yeah.
Exactly. So trying to, I think, set those boundaries is huge there. Trying to set the boundaries, with kids and schooling from home, I think, is also huge, and trying to have a structure there, not just like, okay, I guess we'll read this today. Like, I know that there's a lot of people that have kind of come out to say like, hey, I've been doing this for a while. Here's what works. Here's what doesn't work. And another one of the great benefits of technology is that we have the ability to get access to all that information. So, it's not like you have to go to the library to look any of this stuff up. There's live chats in just about every format that you can think of. My favorite meditation app ever is Insight Timer, and they've had a ton of live events over the course of this year, from meditation gurus to yoga classes to just, here's this celebrity and their meditation practice, like, just trying to, again, get people connected to resources that could potentially help them. And I think that's really core, is just trying to, whether it's physical space, whether it's time, whether it's just stating something out loud, trying to structure the different ways in which we can be ourselves differently, even within the context of our own home. And like that Discord chat room, like, that's a space, right? Like, it's a digital space, but it's still a space. And who I am there is very much, like you said, like, this is how I was when I first met these people. Well, it's not actually, because we're a lot closer now than we were when we first met, and I'm a lot less insecure, which has helped. but you know, just trying to kind of have those differences of being intentional, right? Like when I'm spending time with my spouse and we're doing a date night, like we're doing an actual date night, right? Like we're purposefully making time to spend together, and we're pretending that we're going to, you know, a Mexican siesta by making ourselves margaritas and homemade enchiladas, you know, and you know, trying to structure those things so it's not just like, oh hey, you know,
Yeah.
like
Should we eat? All right.
exactly. And
Yeah.
I think that without that intention and without that kind of clarity of like what is it that we're doing here, that you very much lose that. And these are all, you know, things that a billion and one other people have already said. So it's kind of, it's comforting. It is. It's comforting to like go on MSN and like see another article about like, here's how to stay sane through all this, or here's how to structure your workday, or here's how to 51 great date nights that you can do in your living room. You know, like everybody's kind of dealing with these same struggles, and that universality of it helps, because there really is this sense that we're really not alone. We always say that we're not alone, but like we're really not alone now.
Yeah. And people might have a sense that they need to be talking about these things and finding solutions more than they normally would. So yeah, there's more openness, I think, about the fact that, you know, going back to what you said in the beginning, you know, it's not you, you know,
Right.
that we are all dealing with some kind of struggle in this, and there's a community of people who are dealing with similar struggles as you are, even if not every single person is dealing with similar struggles as you are. So that is a good thing. What you were talking about sort of setting boundaries around kind of the different roles that we play individually. I was thinking as you were saying that, as somebody who's living alone, so I don't have the stresses of kind of balancing different people's needs in my home, but I'm realizing that maybe even without thinking too much about it, I have set up some of those things for myself that are almost like signals to myself of which hat I'm wearing at the moment. And I did at some point kind of become aware of that, and leaning into that, you know, not thinking like, oh, that's weird that I'm doing that, but like I have different pairs of glasses. I will sometimes change my glasses when I'm done working, and I'll put on
That's awesome.
I'll put on like a fun pair of glasses as a way of being like, okay, I'm off the clock. I'm like relaxing now. I'm going to go sit outside or read a book or listen to a podcast. And it's sort of like, okay, it's pink glasses time. Like I know that's like my that's one of the ways I'm kind of signaling that to myself. And it's not a boundary in the sense that it's keeping me from checking my email, but it's a visual reminder. It's an embodied reminder, you know, and that might be changing out of your work clothes for somebody else. That might be the space in your house that you're spending your time in. You know, you might have a real office space that you close the door to maybe and leave behind when you're done working. So I don't know if that's helpful for people, but I realized that as you were talking, that that's one of the things that I've been doing.
Yeah, I make it a point that like when I start my day, I put on like my work clothes, and when I end my day, I change into my pajamas. And like I'm very deliberate about like I could keep the same shirt on. It's not like it's uncomfortable or anything, but like no, like I'm done with my work day. I'm taking this off. I'm transitioning to home mode, like trying to be conscious about that.
Yeah. It's 12:21, so we're almost at 12:30. It's amazing how quickly time goes when we're chatting and enjoying ourselves.
Yes.
I think I had one more question for you, but I also just want to remind folks, anybody who's watching, that if you have questions for Bev or for me, or just thoughts that are coming up for you as you're hearing us talk, there's a comment box below the video, and you can type that in and we'll see it. If there's a little bit of a delay, we'll probably see it about 15 seconds later. But definitely let us know if you have questions, because I'll read them out loud and then we can talk about that before we sign off. So, I mean, I guess the last question I had prepared to ask you, we touched on it, but what do you think are the most important things to keep in mind as we're dealing with keeping relationships healthy in this year, in this time?
So we kind of already talked about this before, but saying it out loud, whatever it is, saying it out loud, whether it's I love you, or I'm sorry, or I messed up, or I'm having a really tough time right now, or I'm struggling with this or that or the other thing. And I think the single biggest thing, if I could pick one word that is key for both the interpersonal and the intrapersonal, it's compassion, right? Like, if my spouse is being really mean to me today, why? What's going on with them? What other role in their life is affecting how they're presenting themselves with me? What boundary are they not able to set for themselves? What energy do they not have? Like, just not taking it for granted that we treat each other or ourselves poorly just because, but that there's always a reason for it. Um, and I would like to think that that's also something that people have maybe been a little bit more conscious of during this time as well, simply because we have been in each other's hair a bit more, because there has been more kind of loss of that separation and that space and that distance that we normally get from each other. I'm certainly not the first person that I've heard talking about, like, check in, ask the question, don't just assume, because probably there's a reason for it, and maybe they're not conscious of it, maybe they're not aware of it, maybe they're not able to kind of express the intricacies of it. But if you ask, rather than just like, all right, you're going to be a jerk to me, I'm going to be a jerk to you, like, rather than assuming, it makes a huge difference. And certainly, in terms of the intrapersonal, it's like self-compassion, self-compassion, self-compassion. Like, that's been, for me personally, that's been the single biggest sort of practice that has always been important to me. And this year has just made it that much more obvious and apparent as to how core that needs to be. So, like, am I taking the time to meditate? Am I, stopping at the end of the day and giving myself permission to just be off? Am I being conscious about, like, how I'm treating myself and whether or not I'm taking care of myself? Like, those kinds of things I think are really core. Um, and also, just like, I think that one of the things that gets us into the most trouble as human beings is just, it's the black and white thinking, right? It's like thinking like done, finished, checked off, and that's not a thing. Everyday life is everyday life, and if something is important to us, it has to continue to be important to us. And I think that that's the spiritual practice, right? Like, we were talking about not knowing when this is going to end, what it's going to look like, all of those things. So it's like, all right, let me just deal with today then. One day at a time has taken on a completely new meaning for a lot of us, and it's become that much more paramount and important in terms of, like, what am I actually worrying about and what am I doing today? Because that's all I've got. And, now that we can't plan things the way that we used to, now that we can't be forecasting a year into the future, I think that a lot of people have to kind of live that now a lot more than they used to. And I personally think that's a really, really great thing. So,
It pushes us for sure to have to do that. And I think that's such an important point also, to remember that it's not check off the box and you've solved something. It's not,
right,
I had the important check-in conversation with my partner, so now we're good.
right.
It is a practice. Everything is a practice. It's a way of being with each other. And I love also that you talked about not just asking, and remembering that if something's going on, there's probably a reason and there's something behind it, for whether it's your child or your partner, or whoever you're stuck in the house with, your roommate. But also saying it out loud. Also, yourself making sure that you are naming what's going on with the people around you.
Yeah.
Remembering that you can say, I'm having a really hard day, or I woke up in a terrible mood today and I'm not even sure why. Or, I'm so sorry. You're right. That was mean. I shouldn't have done that. I don't know why I did it. Like, I think for all kinds of reasons, I think sometimes people have a hard time just being honest about where they are in the moment if they don't feel like they can wrap it up in a bow or fix it.
Right.
And that is so much of the dance of relationships, is being willing to being vulnerable and willing enough to show up as you are. And we're getting practice in that too, right? Like, not knowing what's coming next in that interpersonal relationship just as much as we don't know what's coming next in the world. But that has been a huge lesson for me too in this time, that if we fall back on grace and kindness with each other and compassion for each other, we've actually got a lot going for us if we can do that.
Yeah.
if we can do that, we can make the harder things so much easier. Yeah.
And I think also like the importance, you know, like I've heard so many people say like I couldn't go on this vacation, graduation was ruined, we were going to get married this year, like so many things have not happened. But you know, like I think of a friend of mine from that same college group, his wedding was supposed to be in July and obviously did not take place. He and his eventually to be wife are great, right? Like they're still spending time together, they're still enjoying each other's company. Like they, in some ways, kind of got to start their marriage early because they are very much doing all the things that they're going to be doing aside from like, well, we didn't get to have this cool party with our friends, but that doesn't in any way, shape, or form change the validity of who and what they are to each other. So I think that that's sort of the bigger thing to remember. And I've loved people who were like, all right, well, let's have our Disney vacation at home and let's be playful and silly and do all the things that we would have been able to do if we were there. And is that the same thing? No, but like, is the fun any less real? Is the quality time spent together any less real? Do you have fewer photographs than you would have taken? I mean, I think that those things can still very much be a part of life. Again, if we're intentional about it, and if we take the challenge to do things differently rather than just say like, oh, well, we can't do it.
Right. Mm. Bev, this has been a really awesome conversation. I'm not just saying that. I really appreciate this. Thank you.
Thank you so much for having me on.
Yeah, it is funny to me. I'm like, I feel like I have a very small, very small fraction of like an Oprah show. Like, thanks for having me on. Is there anything else that you wanted to talk about before we go that you want to say, or anything else you want to offer? You can say no. You don't have to have something beautiful to wrap it all up with. But
well, I will say this. Something that I struggled with way before all of this started. But I'm very aware of within the context of all this. When I start to unravel or get really panicked or just overwhelmed, it's usually because of the shoulds. I should be doing this, I should be doing that, I should be doing this, that, and the other thing. It was really funny. There was, when all of this started, like there were a whole lot of like, here's the quarantine teen, right? And you talked about that too. And here's like, you know, a perfectly structured every single minute of the day is spent doing a different thing. Yeah. Exactly. Yeah. And there were a whole bunch of those articles, and early on around an email where like there was one of those articles that was like, again, down to the minute, where all of these people had commented, and the comments were things like, here's my, you know, teen. Wake up at 2 in the afternoon, binge watch Netflix for 4 hours, snuggle with my dog, eat junk food from the fridge, go to bed way too late. Like that's what I'm doing. And it's not
doom
like
scroll on Facebook for 45 minutes. Yeah.
Exactly. And I think like just kind of being aware of like, what am I expecting of myself? What is real and what is reasonable? And when I start to do that thing of like, I have to do this and this and this and this, and I have to do it all right now or the world will end, I will tell myself, I will sit down and I will breathe and I will tell myself as many times as I need to hear it before I start to actually realize that it's true, all you have to do is breathe. And what's really great about that mantra is that I sit there and I literally do nothing at all other than breathe. And the world doesn't end. I have actual factual proof that that statement is true. And that all of these things that I feel like I have to do, and all of these ways that I feel like I'm failing because I'm not doing them, they're just shoulds. They're not actually needs, you know? And I think that that's, you know, it's the same kind of thing as checking in and figuring out our energy level and where we're lacking and why that is. It's realizing what do we actually have to work with and what are false expectations that we're putting on ourselves because we want to tell some perfect story about how we spent our day.
Yeah, when you strip it back in that moment to all you have to do is breathe. Yeah, it doesn't mean that you spend the rest of the day doing nothing but breathing.
Right.
But you realize that everything else that is layered on top of that, you're choosing on some level. Yeah.
And then when you make it simple like that, you get to be more conscious in the choice.
Very
right?
true.
Rather than worrying about like the 20 things, I just go on to the one thing.
Yeah. And it's such a lived and embodied way to experience the grace also, because as you sit there saying all I have to do is breathe, you're actually already doing it, right? You're not even willing yourself to do something. It is
right.
happening. Yeah. There's so many cool, as we know, I think at WellSprings, and as we talk about a lot at WellSprings, there's so many wonderful ways I think that what you do as a mental health professional overlaps with the kind of grace and love that's available to all of us that we talk about at WellSprings. So I'm grateful that you're in the world, Bev, and that you are helping people professionally, and that you're also part of our congregation and able to preach and worship lead and talk about all this with all of us. So thank you so much.
Thank you. It's my beloved community.
You're beloved in it. We're glad you're here. So it's a little past 12:30, I realize, so I should probably let you get back to the rest of your day. And to Buddy, I hope he's probably still sleeping, but
yes,
give him some scratches for me.
Will do. Right behind the ears. That's his favorite spot.
All right, Bev. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
I'll see you somehow soon on one of these screens.
Yes.
Right. Have a good day. Bye.
Bye.
Bye, everybody.